Welcome to the Bleep Bulimia podcast with guest Mike Collins. Hello, everyone. I am Lorianne. I am the host of Bleep Bulimia. And today I'm very pleased to have Mike Collins with us. He is the sugar-free man, and he's going to explain why he's the sugar-free man. I'm looking forward to hearing it. Thank you for being with us, Mike.
Thanks, Lori, and I appreciate you having me. It's an honor. So I became the sugar-free man during the pandemic. It just kind of stuck. What led up to it is a little longer story, but my favorite junkie was my mother. My favorite sugar junkie was my mother, and her mom died when she was just 8 years old.
Oh,
And they made a little deal with my grandfather had to move in with his sister, and they made a little deal with the man across the street who actually was his cousin. They owned the country store across the way. And they said, anytime my mother, that 8-year-old girl, walked into that store, she could get any candy she wanted and put on his tab. And it was a wonderful gesture, really, for a child that just lost her mother. But my mother grew up believing sugar was love. And that's how we grew up. I mean, we were just covered up with sugar. I mean, we really had a lot of sugar in our life. I mean, it was kind of crazy, like Kool-Aid with 3 times the recipe and bread and butter and sugar sandwiches and cake and candy. And, we used to bake on set mornings in the biggest bowl I've ever seen. And so, yeah, anyway, fast forward, I get sober I ran into beer at 14 or 15 years old. And here's an important part, probably the important part of the, talk is that I knew beer changed how I felt. It changed my state. And I could drink, I was kind of shy and I could drink behind the high school and actually talk to girls at 14 or 15. And another quick, cut, edit, jump. I got sober at 28. That party lasted, I don't know, 10 or 12 years. And I just wanted to get healthy after that. So I read a book. I just stumbled on a book called Sugar Blues. It was a very famous book in the late 80s or actually late 70s and early 80s. Gloria Swanson, the woman actually, the famous movie star, married a very, very prominent author. And they promoted that book on the TV and everywhere. And so I just quit. Like it took a while, but I was sober and I just quit. Then I raised 2 sugar-free kids. My kids never had sugar in the womb until they were 6 years old. And they had some sugar at outside birthday parties after that, but they never really had sugar at home till they were, well, at all, till their whole childhood. But anyway, I had a regular life at that point. I just had a, job and I was a business kind of guy. And but when I was the kids obviously grew up a little differently, So they said, Dad, write a book, write a book. Because, every party they go to say they can't have sugar. The Montessori school wouldn't let them have sugar. Nobody let them have sugar. And they didn't, they understood it. And they're not, the answer to your question is they're not regretful. They really, and now they are raising their kids sugar-free. So I do write the book in 2018 and I start coaching people. And from my recovery background, I knew that I needed to have meetings for my, 10 or 12 people I was coaching. We would meet on Tuesday night, and that meeting still exists. But during the pandemic, we went from a meeting a week to 3 to 5 meetings a day in 18 months because all hell broke loose. You saw the newscast where everything's gone. There's nothing in the grocery stores, no baking goods, no sugar, no flour, no Coca-Cola, no ice cream. Everything was bought up. People were, sheltering in place and they were just really falling back to their addictions. And so today, we were approved a couple of years ago by the National Board of Health and Wellness Coaches. That platform just gets bigger every day. And I think the answer to the whole bulimia, binge eating, food addiction, weight loss, metabolic health syndrome is closer to recovery from alcohol and than it is to anything to do with eating or diet or the diet industry, which says eat less or exercise more. So we're just growing the platform. Probably skipped a few steps. I did open sugaraddiction.com in 2009 and sugardetox.com in 2020. But the most important event we've ever had is called the Quit Sugar Summit. And I don't know when this will air, but we have a big event coming up in June of 26, and there'll be replays, but I've interviewed 500 of the world's lead experts on sugar addiction, eating disorders. I also left out that I was chairman of the board of the Food Addiction Institute during the pandemic. So I'm, kind of have a rounded career in this, even though it's kind of really my second career. So that's how I became the sugar-free man. Usually brings up more questions than it is, but
Well, that's very interesting. I know that I went through, it was a fundraiser. So there's a couple of them, no drinks at all for 30 days. And you go out
okay.
and it's a fundraiser for cancer, which I've done a couple of years because my nephew passed away from cancer. So it was near and dear to me. So did my grandmother.
Right.
And then there's another one that was like no sugar at all. And that's a very difficult thing because you have to check all the labels. Like I didn't even know, I wanted to have spaghetti, but everything, almost everything has sugar
Yeah.
in it. So to go sugar free, how do you do that?
Well, it's remarkably harder than people know, for a lot of reasons, I think what's more prevalent today, and it's got me really reinvigorated, really re-excited about my career path and helping people and growing the platform, is the advent and the ascension of something called metabolic psychiatry. And metabolic psychiatry is this, and there's so many now case studies and literal billionaires because some people in their family have been helped by this, where they change their diet, uh, and get off depression meds. And it's only tangentially understood now that, um, basically addiction is a dopamine regulation problem. It's a problem of, reward chemical, whether it's eating disorders or whatever. Even anorexia has been brought into this a little bit. They're treading lightly there. But most of the eating disorders, emotional eating, addictive eating, even weight loss they're starting to understand that dopamine, serotonin, and I say dopamine, I mean all of the brain and body reward chemicals, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, GABA, oxytocin, adrenal glands, endorphins, cannabinoid receptors, all of the people are, like I said, they know now what dopamine, they have an idea that it has something to do with their brain and their frontal cortex and their deep limbic brain. And so, it's this idea that sugar, actually, to answer your question directly, is that sugar affects the brain, and it's the dopamine, or the dose makes the poison. So the dose is a 24 literal, in 90% of the population, a 24/7 drip of sugar and ultra processed carbohydrates, right? And that is the problem. And you do a little cocaine, you do a little heroin, you do some amounts of the powerful drugs, but our body never, ever, your brain, more importantly, never gets a rest when it comes to sugar and fructose. And this is always a controversial statement and process, or thought process, is that fructose is the offending molecule, the behavioral change molecule, the one that causes the fatty liver, which is an alcoholic's disease. So it's really been a scientific explosion in the decade that I've been doing summits, and even more in the last 3 years that I've been doing with the metabolic psychiatric folks. We're starting to understand the effect of sugar in the brain and behavior, really.
That's interesting. When you were saying about the reward, that is so true. I mean, I grew up in a family. My mother was not, my parents were not big sugar offers. That wasn't really the thing. It was though mealtime,
Yeah,
right? We did when we had, for us, like, getting a chocolate bar was like, whoa, like really exciting because it wasn't something that was
right.
there. But again,
Yeah,
there's the reward idea, and then there's also the food, the comfort food, the food that my mom made and everything. And it was just like,
right.
still to this day, believe it or not, I'm a recovered bulimic, 15 years. But there are times where I'll sit there and go, you know what? I want this. Like one of the meals that my mother used to make for us when I was a kid. And I make it and I enjoy
Right.
it. But quantity is obviously the difference of what I live now. You know,
Yeah.
if that makes
Yeah.
sense, right? So I'll have it. I won't deny it to myself. I do not believe that that's a good thing, but again, it's kind of like a little reward because I don't have it all the time. So yeah, right. I mean, that reward issue is big. My bulimia was really bad though, because that's where reward becomes unhealthy.
Well, that's exactly correct. The reward. And look, I mean, what we're finding is like what they found in drug and alcohol recovery is that, it's a very common construct in the world of drug and alcohol recovery that if you started using drugs and alcohol at 14 or 15, you stopped growing emotionally. You just didn't ever solve life's problems, adult problems. You would just numb the next day. And the day after that, the problems would remain. And so you never really got to your relationships or your finances or your career or your schooling. You just, you would numb out because it was too stressful. And what they're discovering and have discovered is that as children, you got to extrapolate that thought process backwards to likely the womb, but 3, 4, 5 years old when you got a little bit of that chocolate bar and you were excited. You would sneak that chocolate bar or find that chocolate bar. Even a kid can sugar pretty easily in this society, free, is that it made you feel just, and this is imperceptibly like a little less anxious, a little bit less afraid, a little bit less hurt from something, divorce or some argument your parents are having. And that blast of dopamine in that little, but that adult blast of dopamine in that little adult, in that little child's body really was soothing. And so it did serve a purpose back then for the people where it gets exaggerated, right? It's exaggerated. Um, and so it's a tying together of cultural norms and behavioral issues. And bulimia, it's for your audience. I think it's important that I kind of delve into what I've discovered with over 63 or some odd thousand detoxes. What I have created is pattern recognition at scale. Most of the people, not most, a lot of the people that come to me have a background in eating disorders of some sort or emotional eating, which are two different camps, two different schools. Now, you mentioned volume eating, and there's we find that bulimics, we're really good with bulimics and really good with binge eaters. And about 85% of the people who come to us with those eating disorders, even though they've got maybe possibly been to a treatment center, they end up about 85% of them, if they remove the reward part of the eating process, the serious sugar, dopamine, serotonin, all of these, the fructose, and they remove that part, about 85% of them don't need to weigh and measure. Now, I want to clarify this in a deep way. 85 or 15% of people are truly volume eaters. They actually hack their neurobiology by stretching their stomach and kicking in the endorphins and dopamine from their stretch receptors. And those people will have to weigh and measure. So it's a really, and the same thing applies with the emotional eating, folks. the emotional eating folks are the same, okay? Emotional eating, everybody says, well, yeah, I'm an emotional eater. They know what comfort is, whatever. But the solutions out there, the gurus, the books, etc., those folks only have a portion of the equation, right? Which is, that they can intuitively, and they do go into the trauma in their defense. They do go into the things that they were putting off. Now, remember, as people are coming up, this is not like I need a beer on a Friday. I'm an adult and I had a rough week and I want to just knock out the feelings. I want to feel a little better. This is an unconscious process that develops through childhood, right? And now the intersection, the collision, if you will, of metabolic psychiatry, of the understanding, the deep understanding. Everybody's seen this, but I don't actually believe it. I don't want to get you knocked off of Facebook or anywhere else, but the studies that cocaine affects the brain in the same way that cocaine does. But it's absolutely positively true in an MRI study. And so you have to kind of start to think about this addictive nature. And there's a lot of what I call diplomats, if you will. I'm one of them, where we're trying to make peace with the eating disorder people and the emotional eating people and the addiction recovery people, because in the eating world, if you can't moderate sugar or flour, and may be happening to some of your listeners, if they can't rate sugar or flour, they literally don't graduate. They're not considered well. But there is, and this happened when I was the chairman of the board of the Food Addiction Institute, that about a third of I was kind of brought in for marketing stuff. People that were on the boots on the ground, people that had been working with food addict for 50 years, they kind of discovered this understanding that people, their clients, a full third of them biochemically could not ingest sugar without setting up cravings for more sugar. Okay. Now although I want to quantify this and qualify it, you can be a very thin sugar addict, but these I'm about to tell you track very well with the obesity numbers, but you can, like I said, be a very thin sugar addict. We have a coach who's an ultra marathoner who ran 100 miles a week and still couldn't take the last 15 pounds off. But about a third of people biochemically cannot ingest sugar without setting up cravings for more. And then there's a third of people, that's the obese group in the United States and all over the world now. And then there's about a third of people, what we call harmful users of these sugar and ultra processed carbohydrate products. And they're the overweight people, okay? They can possibly use a little bit. They can leave it. And if they were using sugar as a child and they realize it, they get some help, they get through the trauma or whatever we're anesthetizing with it, even the habit. And then the last group of people are, we all hate, no, just kidding. Those folks, like your friend, can have half a beer, half a glass of wine, and leave it alone for the next month, right? They can just take it or leave it, right? And so that's kind of the breakdown. But you've heard this term TOFI, thin on the outside, fat on the inside. If someone is very thin, they could have a lot of visceral fat around their organs, right? And so it's, again, collision of modern science and the diagnostic tools that is really changing the game in this world of weight loss, metabolic health, and eating disorders. I'll
That's
stop rambling in a little
no,
bit.
no, that's
Yeah.
that's actually really interesting. I'm loving that this is a topic I really believe my audience is gonna love to hear about. Um,
Yeah.
and the result. But as I was saying though earlier, and I just was curious, so you've written a book. Um, I don't believe in diets, but I do believe in eating healthy just because I choose to, not because it's something that I'm told to do. But like I said to you, I
Right.
eat But if there's I don't like pizza, so that's not a big thing for me. But if I want a little bit of chips, I'll have a little bit of chips. But to go sugar free, as I said, I was even looking at, like, I bought some bolognese sauce and I look and I go, oh my goodness, there's sugar in that. Like pretty well anything. Like, so just if you could guide, like, how do you go sugar free when our world is surrounded by sugar products?
No, it's a fair question. It's a great question, actually. A common question. And people, the most common question is, Mike, do I have to do this for the rest of my life? And but the way that I look at it is my only goal in life is to introduce to people 90 days of 100% abstinence. That's it. If I can get that done, and a lot of the 12-step recovery programs now have these eating food plan, not OA, but the rest of them. It's a long story. I can go into it if you like. I'm kind of a 12-step anthropologist, historian kind of person. Um, and I think they helped a little bit in the science that's evolved now. But anyway, what I'm getting at here is that um, quit, like 100% abstinence is easier for someone who has some of these issues than 90% moderation. If you can, and one of the things that's just been amazing, I did not expect it, I was not looking for it, I was not ready for it, is that we've had hundreds of people lose 100 pounds. We've had hundreds of people put type 2 diabetes in remission, lupus, chronic fatigue. What do you call it? The rheumatoid arthritis is just, in my opinion, a paper tiger. Hands and knees almost immediately stop hurting. We had one woman, she had already had one knee operation, had the other one scheduled. I said, give me 90 days. That was 2.5 years ago. And to this day, she's never had that second operation because it doesn't hurt anymore. She has full range of motion. So what I'm trying to explain here is that um, the the 100% abstinence part is like the people who I do the surveys of, the people that lost 100 pounds, put type 2 in remission, or all the other things that I just mentioned, is not the first thing that they're happy about. I'm trying to get testimonials so I can reach more people, right? Well, the thing that they tell me is that their brain came back online, that they focus better, they remember better, that their foggy brain is gone, right? And so this has been and then the collision in the last 3 years, metabolic psychiatry, and now you have a unified theory of addiction, you have a unified theory of food addiction, of eating disorders, of emotional eating. You have an understanding of what this is all about, right? I mean, at its core, it became sugar in our society became the outlet for emotional calming, for self-calming. People, when they're attracted to sugar, in that, they're not thinking about a taste on their tongue. They're not thinking about cravings for chocolate or ice cream or crunchy or whatever. They're craving a dopamine hit. And again, when I say dopamine, I mean all those brain and body reward chemicals. And if I can just 90 days get that reframe in place so that the folks can sit down when they're craving and say to themselves, what do I really need, dear? And you call yourself dear. Like, what do I really need? What am I feeling? Where in my body am I upset? Okay. And if we can get that done, if we can get that reframe, that subconscious raised to the conscious, then people start to see how, and the interaction with the other people who are a month or a year or 10 years, 5 years ahead of them, they can start to see that, okay, maybe when my parents got divorced at 4 or 5 and I started gaining weight, or 10 or 12, and I started gaining weight, I was soothing myself with the chocolate, and they let me have it because they felt sorry for me. Um, and they started having soda in the refrigerator, which they never had, you know? And so when you can make those connections from the unconscious to the conscious, to what the drug, and I mean it with every description of the word, if the drug, the sugar, if they can make that one connection, then they can solve this issue. And I can guarantee you it's not eat less and exercise more. Most of people come from me for weight loss. They're originally, or type 2 diagnosis. So yeah, the bulimia, I was really happy to hear from you and to be on this podcast because I want to make peace with the eating disorder world, and I want to be one of those olive branch people and the diplomats who reach out to the people who are, and there's likely some practitioners in your audience who still ascribe to this ability for some people to moderate. And I just want them to know that if they would experiment with 90 days of sugar freedom and ultra processed carbohydrates, which means sugar and flour, and in our program, caffeine, because it's still wiring the brain with the chocolate and the tea and the coffee and the Coca-Cola since you were a kid. I have a great story of an Olympic athlete. She won a bronze medal in the Olympics. And I worked with her for a long time in our original engagement, but she couldn't get off the sugar. Now, this is a woman that can do anything with her body, right? Obviously. And she was starting to see her. By this time, she was a chiropractor, and her kids were starting to really abuse sugar. And she, in 3 months work, she couldn't get off sugar. She just kept falling back. She was still swimming. She was thin. She couldn't stop the sugar, and she knew now that was a problem after 90 days. So I continued working with her because, let's be honest, I wanted a testimonial from an Olympic athlete. And so it took us a while to figure out that the coaches had been giving her coffee at 10 years of age for performance in the pool when she was younger. Okay. And no child is drinking that product without a lot of sugar. So the brain had registered this wired together, fired together construct. Not construct, it's a reality now. It's very proven reality. Excuse me. And that when she got off the coffee, she was drinking black coffee in the morning, just a little in the morning. When she put it down, then the sugar went away and she was able to quit. So, I mean, the brain science is what I'm starting to really get into and really, integrate in our platform and let people understand that, like, just like a lot of sugar is going to cause fatty liver or weight gain, we know now that a lot of sugar, ultra processed carbohydrates, because flour turns to sugar in the stomach. So anything ultra processed is going to be a problem, is going to change your behavior. Hell, drug and alcohol recovery, that whole industry, that multi-billion-dollar industry, is called behavioral health. It's the change process that we're looking for. And my only goal is to expedite the process so that people don't have to suffer for years back and forth, back and forth, back and forth.
That's really interesting. So for one, I have to tell you this. It's kind of a weird story. So my parents gave me tea when I was a kid. And then I must have been about 6 or 7, I don't know. And then they gave me a coffee. So that went on for maybe about a year. And then one time they gave me a coffee. I thought it was rotten tea. That was my thought was, oh, this is rotten tea, because that's I drink coffee now, but as a kid, I thought that was funny. Um, just quickly, because I don't want to run this too long, but we did speak to when we were emailing. Sugar does have, from what I understand, and I've heard this many times, an effect on dementia and Alzheimer's. My mother-in-law was a sugar fanatic and she ended up with Alzheimer's. I'm not saying that that was the cause of it, but I'm hearing that sugar over time gives you more of your risk increases. Is Am I wrong? Like, this is what I've been hearing. I don't.
Oh, look, the reason I probably, well, I know I told you a little bit about it. So, my mother also died of Alzheimer's. So that little 8-year-old in that story, died. She was a brilliant woman. I mean, brilliant. And she was literally the commissioner of social services in our town, in our county. And, but in an era when women didn't really have those positions, didn't really work. And so she, like, when she was getting older, she was in her early 80s. I think it had started kind of in her late 70s, and I was there, I would spend summers there to help out my brothers, whatever. And we could not get her to eat real food. We just couldn't, like, the organism, minus that brilliant brain, wanted to just eat sugar, only sugar. One time, I tell this story a little bit. So my niece used to do the shopping for them. And but my father actually had dementia as well afterwards. It was weird. But they were on sale. They dropped off 30 ice cream sandwiches on a Tuesday. And when I looked in the freezer on Thursday, they were all gone. Like
Oh,
in 2 days, the two of them ate 30, 15 apiece. Well, probably my mother ate 20, I'm guessing. I don't know. I wasn't there to monitor them every day, every minute, and so it was, that organism, we couldn't get her to sit down and eat a dinner, a regular dinner. She just wanted dessert or whatever. And now the science is very, very clear, very clear. You can look this guy up, Dale Bredesen. He has a book called Surviving Alzheimer's. There's 12 stories written by the actual survivors. These are doctors, lawyers, professionals, or professors, business owners, and lost their practices, had to move home, had to be in the facility, and they came back. Not everyone all the way, but some of them did. They came back by changing the diet to exactly the diet that I have described in this event, so in this podcast. No flour, no sugar, very light carbohydrates. And they put in remission. Now, there's even a better case example. One of his mentees is a woman named Dr. Heather Sanderson. Dr. Sanderson had a facility at one time and has had the same experience. But this guy, Hal Kramer, has a place in Arizona we called Paradise for Parents, and he literally, people show up in his memory care and health in his adult care places, and they're overweight, they've got other things, and they've got Alzheimer's, and he ends up sending them home because they become full functioning. And so this is very, like, it's very small, well-known ecosystem, the one I populate with these 500 interviews that I've done over the years. But it's real and it exists, and there's proof, and there's scientific studies that we may have taken an evolutionary wrong turn in society 10,000 years ago, when grains, and then eventually ultra processed, and definitely we took one when the boats would go from the Great Britain to the south, to the west of Africa, and pick up the slaves and go to and then they grew from sugar and rum, etc., and coffee, the largest empire in the world. Like El Chapo had nothing on the British Empire, and it was all built on the backs of sugar, the addiction to sugar, and the slavery. And it's amazing now that this battleship, this giant wave, has to be turned. It has to be turned around, because the science it's happened in our lifetime, Lorianne. I mean, you and I, when we were young, drinking and driving was like, just don't get caught, right?
right.
It was like the police were the enemy, okay? Right? And the same thing with cigarette smoking. It was like doctors advertised on TV, you could smoke planes and buses and restaurants, and you could, and now in both cases, the participants in those activities are literal social pariahs. If you're a drinker driver, you are ostracized if get caught, or even if you do it and don't get caught and people know about it.
Yeah.
But in the cigarettes, you've been isolated to this, this little place outside the office building, and people don't want to hang around because you smell like smoke. But that was not the case when I was young. I mean, we smoked in the bars and restaurants and the plane. When I was really young, they used to smoke in the planes. So it's like this societal change has happened, right? And it before there's history for, and forget about Mothers Against Drunk Driving being part of that change, that help in changing. And so it's like now when a woman gets pregnant, strangely enough, we can't figure this out, but 95% of my clients are women between 40 and 80. I can't get this down to childbearing age women. I don't understand why they're not interested in this information. But what's happening, I believe, in 10 or 15 years is that when someone gets pregnant, they're not only going to quit cigarettes and they're not going to quit drinking, and they're going to quit sugar, because the brain development in that first 1,000 days is so exaggerated, so exponential. And if I could told you the story of my children who were raised from the womb till six without sugar, it would blow your mind. You think I was lying to you, bragging about them or something, which would be true, but you know, I am just not that smart. Like they are rocket scientists smart. So, perfect scores on their college entrance exams smart, stuff that nothing doesn't happen unless you're Bill Gates or, you know, Mark Zuckerberg. So anyway, I'm really passionate about this topic. I'm happy that you invited me. I'm happy to answer any other questions, or I don't want to get proselytizing, but I do a little bit because I've seen so many happy success stories.
I love that. I really appreciate it. This is a topic that hasn't come up regarding, sugar addictions. We've talked about addictions, we talked about that, but this is like specific and I like that. By the way,
Yeah.
to your speaking of parents, my mother loves sugar, but since the loss of my dad, she's gone cuckoo. So, like, she loves her ginger ale and she
Yeah.
loves her ice cream bars. And I told her, I said, Mom, it's not good. And she is starting to have, like, she was diagnosed with mild dementia. I said, Mom, this can actually, make this go faster if you continue with all the sugar you're eating. And she goes, I'm going to be 91. I can do whatever I want. So,
And people have that attitude. My mother had the same attitude. I mean, I was 5 days in, and we were walking, eating whole food. And I remember it like it was yesterday, the reddish couch, looking at the lake. And she said, Michael, it's just too hard. I'm old or something like that. And I'm like, I get it, but
and she missed.
she's probably
I don't.
probably in a place where she could recover, she could stop this progression. But when you have dementia, I've heard some of the stories, you read some of the stories in Dr. Bredesen's books, they don't really know they have dementia. Like it's not like, well, I have dementia, like
Oh, she's
they
a.
just they're a little slower. They think they're a little slower, you know what I mean? Or it's aging, right? And it's not aging. It's
No,
not.
my mother is very aware. I mean, the other day, just quick, I mean, I got her a taco. I said, "You want one of my fish tacos?" She doesn't like fish, but the tacos are really good. She did like them, but she goes,
Yeah.
What's a taco?" And I mean, she's had them many times. And then I said, "Would you like a bag of bagels?" She goes, "I don't eat bagels." She does. She didn't even know what they were.
Right.
So then she looked at me and she says, "Oh my goodness." She goes, "I am really losing it, aren't I?" So she is. I try not to make her feel like I don't say, Mom, you eat bagels. I said, "Oh, Mom, they're like bread with the little hole in the middle." Like I'll explain
Yeah.
to her instead of making her feel, Mom, you've had them a
Yeah.
million times. But it's a tough thing.
Yeah.
Yes, I do believe if she did stop, but my mother is at this point where, she's stubborn and going, "Hey, I've lived this long. Let me do what I want to do until I go." So,
Well, I mean, just as some support, it's going to be harder for you
yep.
because she could go to 95, and between 93 and 95 is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
and very expensive. Can't live in her own home.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a lot to it. And now they're already, implicating Parkinson's as well
Oh,
as
really?
a dopamine dysregulation problem. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it's, the brain is not a separate organ. You know what I mean? It's those glucose spikes and those fructose spikes are affecting. So
I appreciate your time now. Before you go, can you please let people know where they can find you?
yeah, sugardetox.com is the best way to do it. But we have an event. When will this air? We're recording it on June the 9th.
Your event.
When's what?
When is your event?
Well, it doesn't matter. We have events every January for sure called the Quit Sugar Summit. And that summit has all these experts that I talk about and name and stuff. So sugardetox.com, and you can just Google Mike Collins. You see my name there, Mike Collins or Sugar Free Man. I'm been on 100 podcasts and summits and stuff, so I'm out there. You can find me on all the socials.
Beautiful. Thank you so much again for your time and for being here and sharing with the audience. Really appreciate it, Mike.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode. Be sure to visit me at bleepbulimia.com.